Jesus confirms to them that they too will undergo suffering and persecution. Although theirs will not be of the same manner of Christ's cosmic suffering on the cross, yet the Lord's words here seem to prophetically point to the suffering and persecution that James and John would have to eventually undergo. In fact, in the book of Acts, in chapter 12, verse 2, Luke tells us about the execution of James by the sword. Now, later Christian tradition would tell us that he was actually beheaded, martyred, as one of the earliest martyrs of the church. John, on the other hand, we are very aware that he was separated from the people of God and exiled in Patmos. They will indeed drink of the same cup and be baptized with the same baptism. They will suffer. They will be persecuted for the sake of the gospel. But Jesus turned down their request for exaltation. Now, some people look at this passage, right, when Jesus says, "It is not mine to grant," and they say, "See, Jesus isn't God. Jesus isn't God. He can't grant it. See?" And they think that, you know, in moments like that, when Jesus said, "Only the Father knows," that, see, that's proof that he's just human. But pay attention to what he says. He says, "It is not, but to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." It has been prepared. Here the Lord Jesus actually gives us a glimpse into the abiding nature of the eternal decrees that have been set before the foundations of the world. Jesus too acts only on the basis of what God has planned in eternity past. He is not here to overturn the Father's will, but rather to accomplish it. He came to live a perfect, obedient life, one that was required of all of us, but one that we all fail to live out. Now look at the next section, right? When the 10 other disciples heard of this conversation, which up to now had only been between Jesus and the brothers James and John, they grew angry at the two. They were indignant of them, verse 41. But why was this? Was it because the rest of the 10 had all along understood what the Master was teaching them about the kingdom? Were they mad at the two brothers for being so bold and manipulative about their desire to be exalted in a purely worldly sense? How could you be so worldly? How could you think about the worldly kingdom? It's not about the world. Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Was that the line of reasoning behind the indignation of the 10 other disciples? Or were they mad because they thought that the two had unnecessarily troubled the Master with an outrageously selfish request? Was it out of a righteous anger? Now before we go there, think about, many of you are working. Think about the workplace, right? Think about when a position opens up, one that you've been wanting for quite some time now, one that you've been vying for, okay? And then your peers apply to it. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about them wanting a position over you that you've been wanting all along? Do we feel happy for them? Or do we despise them for trying to get ahead of us? How do we feel when they eventually get the position? Do we just fall in line for our own sakes? But secretly, we're brooding inside, "Oh, he's not better than me." But what about when they don't get it? When they vie for it, and then they don't get the position? How do we feel then? Now, I don't know about you. Perhaps you're not as sinful as I am, but I'd feel, serves you right for trying to get ahead of me. Right? See, guys, this was exactly how the other 10 disciples felt about James and John. This too was the manner of King David, if you would remember, when he tried to hide his own guilt regarding his murder of Uriah and his illicit affair with Bathsheba. When the prophet Nathan came to confront him by telling him a parable of his own selfishness and pitilessness, what did he do? How did he react? King David grew indignant, and he ordered and he swore by his life that that man in Nathan's story deserved death, only to be confronted with the fact that he was that very same man. This same false indignation too filled the hearts of the 10 disciples. They felt offended, wronged by the two for wanting to be greater than them in the kingdom. They too wanted those positions. Remember the second time, chapter 9, when Jesus predicted his death and resurrection on their way back? Though they had not understood the implications of what the Master had said, death, suffering, resurrection, although they didn't understand, yet they debated among themselves who among them was the greatest. Their show of indignation here simply betrayed their own selfish ambitions. They too had missed the point of what Jesus was trying to say. Indeed, they too wrongly desired glory and exaltation for themselves. And so in response to this, what does Jesus do? Put yourself in Jesus' shoes. You've been going around Israel for 3 years, preaching the kingdom, healing the sick, raising the dead back to life. Clearly, what you're doing is different from all the other teachers. And now you're on your way to Jerusalem, finally on your way, on the last leg of your ministry. And these, the 12, who are supposed to carry on this same ministry, still haven't got it. How would you have reacted? I would have been furious. What? 3 years! And still you're missing the point entirely. But thankfully, I'm not Jesus. The Lord Jesus gathers them together and gently corrects their misplaced yearnings for glory. First, he exposes the falseness of their selfish ambitions. In verse 42, he says, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them." Now notice the irony in Jesus' words. Those who are considered, quote unquote, or another way of saying, those who are so-called rulers of the Gentiles. For that's how they perceive them. The rulers of the Gentiles. The Romans who were the colonizers. That's how they perceive them. They didn't want to acknowledge them as rulers. They didn't want to acknowledge them as the great ones.